Hello everyone, welcome to Chess Kicks and my name is Deepak. Here in this tutorial we are going to be talking about the white labeling of an Angular application. In order to understand white labeling of an application, we must understand the build system of Angular, and in this tutorial precisely we are going to be covering that. Next we will move to what white label solution are and then how you can generate multiple white label branding from the same code base. That's something we are going to be showing you in a short while. Later, after that, we are also going to be talking about why it is important to keep the repository same for a single for a multiple white label solution, and what you can exactly do as an Angular developer to do that, right? And then we will also see what style preprocessor options are. That's something which is very important for you to understand, because basis this we are going to be generating the white label solution. That's something which is also available in the Angular documentation. And then we are also going to be making multiple logos, and something that I already have and something that I have already shown you in the introduction video prior to this video. And we are going to be generating that, and then we are going to be putting that in different folders, and then basis those we will generate multiple bundles around it, right? So stay tuned, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to be covering all of these options, all of these points in this tutorial, but let's start with the build system first, right? So in order to understand the build system, you must understand that what angular.json is all about, and also you must understand what package.json is all about. So these are the two very important file in Angular, right? So package.json basically covers all the dependencies that you have in your system, and something that is available from the npmi. The moment you do npmi, all these dependencies gets downloaded and then gets installed and remains in the node module. That's something that you can also see from here. And after all of these are available, you run multiple commands to run this. So please note that this is an Angular 18 application, as you can also see from the line number 13 onwards. All of these dependencies are Angular 18 dependencies, and we are now going to show you how this application exactly looks like when it runs on the browser. So this is the application that we are going to be changing. So you can see that it also uses NGRX18, and this is the login form. So let me just fill something right here. So once you log in, it takes a moment and then appears here. So you can search the student name from here. You can see the add student form available right here. And you can see that it is a yellow theme, right? It basically waits for you to fill in all the details and post that it appears. And then this is the third form that you see here on the third page, is basically the contact us form, right? So this is the application, and what we are going to be building is basically these two applications, as you can see on your screen right now. So the first is the default application that you can also see right away, and then this is the application we're going to be building, and then we are going to be generating both of these applications from a single code base using multiple different command lines. We are going to be running a few commands, and basis those commands, it will pick up different configuration for each of these, and then that's how it would render these two applications, right? That's what we are going to be doing. So before that, let me talk about the build system once again. So angular.json is right here, and angular.json is right available here. So if you look closely here on the angular.json, let me just explain all of these, right? So if you come here, you would see that the project is student entry, and this is the project essentially we are going to be changing, and this is the name of the project. So this student entry is also something available on your package.json here on the line number 2, right? So let me put this right here. So here now you can see that the students entry is the project that we're going to be changing. So if you come down here, you may notice that the style we have used is SCSS, is the CSS preprocessor. There are various preprocessors available, but then I personally have a tendency to use SCSS all I've been using SCSS all that while. And SCSS basis, using SCSS, I can declare multiple variables and use them into different files and generate multiple builds, right? So that's exactly what we're going to be doing here as well. No exception. So if you come down here, you would notice that it's a root, source root, prefix, architect, right? So architect is the object that you need to be focusing at. So under angular.json, the architect basically tells you that what exactly needs to be done when you build a command, what exactly needs to be done when you serve it, what exactly needs to be done when you test it, and what exactly needs to be done in extract I18n, which is the internationalization, right? So what we really need to do is that firstly, in order to generate those two applications, we also need to serve them, right? So how do you generate an application is via a build command. That's something which I probably understand. I think that you all probably would know, because I'm assuming that you all basically know the basic of Angular by now, right? So we are going to be changing the two object in here. The first is the build, the second is the serve. So why serve and why build? Build is basically when you generate the build, and serve in order to serve the application on the browser the way you see right now it's running. Serve is something that you run using ng-serve, the way you have it listed here in the package.json file in line number 6. And in order to build it, which is listed on the line number 7 of package.json. So what is the build configuration one must keep, right? So if you look closely over here, so under the build and the builder, so builder is the build Angular application. It's basically part of the Angular dev kit that we are going to be making use of. And if you look at the other options, the output directory is obviously the dist and the student's entry. In case if you want to change it, this is the place you are required to change the output directory. But that's not something comes within the scope of this tutorial, so I'm not going to be covering more in detail. So let's move forward. So what is the style? What is the starting of your application is basically the index.html, which appears right here. The browser is main.ts, so browser going to be running that main.ts. So I'm going to be polyfilling the zone.js because it's still in Angular 18. The zone.js is basically served through a polyfill. But later you would find zoneless application probably from the Angular 19 onwards, and that's something if you want to see more about it, please stay tuned to my channel, because that's what I have on my cards next. I'm going to be building an Angular 19 application from zoneless, and we'll see how it performs and how it behaves. Anyways, so this is again something that we would do in the future, but for now let me just focus again on these properties. So tsconfig again, that's something which is a TypeScript configuration file, which is available in this right here, tsapp.json. So if you notice here that for the options under the build, similarly you have an options under the serve, right? So you can see that the configuration over here, right? So in case if you want to know, in case if you want to change something, you are basically required to come here and change it, right? And in case if you are, let me do it this way, right? So under the build, if you come down here, you have these styles, meaning the styles file that gets packed with these. And similarly the scripts, something that if you have additional scripts available in your asset folder, that's something you can pack right here in case of a build. And these are some of the configuration. So this is for the budget. In case if you exceed the budget, that's the warning that you usually see on your CLI is basically coming through this particular file and this particular section. In case if you have some budget related constraint, you can come here and can increase or decrease based on your need, right? So this is about the configuration, and this is for the production configuration. In case of a development configuration, you can notice that optimization, extract licenses, source map, it's all set to true, and the other two are set to false. With using this, what really happens is that you're able to debug your code, right? So when you say that when you build a development based application, your code is also something which gets the source map. So when you have the source map, you're allowed to debug it also, like using the TypeScript file. But I believe that by now you understand that browser doesn't really understand the TypeScript. It only understands the JavaScript. And TypeScript to JavaScript bridge is basically covered through source maps. So when you have a source map, that's when you are allowed to basically see your code in the TypeScript, and you're also able to debug that, right? So it's very important. But then please understand that when you're building a production grade application, you don't really need a source map, and that's why we switch it off, or we essentially don't provide this particular feature or this particular property right here, right? So that's why under the production configuration you would not find the source map as true, right? So now the default configuration is production. So let's say if you're building it, and in case if no other configuration is provided in the command line, so default configuration which is being picked is production, which is essentially defined right here, right? So let's say if you define development, then obviously it will take up the development default configuration if you don't provide any configuration, and that's something which you essentially provide through the config flag, and that's something which we'll also see in a short while. But just to give you an understanding that this is what it essentially does. Right now, let me talk about the serve part. So here in the serve part, you can understand that the builder it is going to be making use of is build angular and dev server, right? And after that, it again has its own configuration. So build target is this student entry build production, and then case over development, it is the build target is build development, and default configuration for serving is development. You may understand this here, right? So let's say if I put the build target production over here, then you would not really find your other source maps and other things available here. So let me just do that. Let me show you. So in order to do this, I'm going to be restarting the application because it's a JSON file change, and whenever you are changing any JSON file in your Angular application, you must restart your application, right? So npm run start. Now let's see if we get the other important files available here. Do an inspect and do a source. There you go. Right, so now let's see if I get all the files. Now you may notice that we don't really have any file which is related to the map or any file which is related to development, right? So how it is so? And let's say if you wish to see how your production application would behave, this is a place where you can do a serve default configuration to production or default configuration to development, and basis that you will be able to see what different purpose will it serve, right? So let me change it back to development. I hope that I'm able to put my point forth very clearly that these source maps and other things are very important, and these are all governed by angular.json, which is defined here at the root of your application directory, right? So let me again restart the applications. Let me put h and let me quit it and then run it again. Okay, so now I have started this application again in the development default mode. So now you can see that all your TS and HTML file also appears here the way it is right now. That's something that you can see on your screen, right? So I believe this point is clear as well, like what really happens in case of a default configuration and production configuration. If you have any doubt, please do write down in the comment section below, and in case if you want to delve more about it, delve in deep details about what these are, then I already have a detailed video tutorial available on my channel, something that you can go back and refer to and see how it functions, right? So what I'm gonna do is I'm just all right. So now after finishing up all of this, I'm going to be quickly giving you a gist of what CSS variables are all about, and then what is SCSS variables, and then we're also going to be making use of these along with the Angular build system to generate multiple branding, right? So let me talk about the CSS variable. So CSS variable recently came along, right? Or I wouldn't say it much recently, but then it's been a while then, and then that CSS variables are there in practice. So what really happens is that, let's say if you wish to define any of your common value, right? So just the way you define the variables in your TypeScript file or in JavaScript file, same way you can define those variables here in the CSS files as well. So these variables are later then used in multiple different components, right? So if you look at our application, you would notice that let me open these, right? So let's say any of the component that we have over here. Let me open, let's say, a dashboard. Okay, so if you look closely here in the dashboard component, you may notice that we are defining individual CSS files. Or let me go to the login component probably, because the login component CSS has some files. If you look closely over here, you would notice that we are going to be making use of some of the colors over here, and these some of the colors and some of the max width and some of the padding and some of the values, something that we keep common across the application, right? So if you're defining something which is very common, right, so why do you want to define them individually, independently in each of the components? You can define them in globally, and then you can just import those files just the way we do in case of a TypeScript file. You can import those and make use of those variables in your application, right? Similarly, here in CSS, we have got variables. And how do you define the CSS variables? It's fairly simple. You like W3 School is a very popular website. You can come here and tells you like how you can define the variables here. So you can define the variables just the way by giving the name and a value here, and then later use it. But then we have been using SCSS, which is a preprocessor of CSS, and that's why we are going to be covering the CSS variables. But I just wanted to touch upon this fact that these variables are available in the CSS as well lately, and something that you can make use of. Now let me open the SCSS. So here in the SCSS, the idea behind defining the variables remains same, right? So you define the variable like the way you have it here. So in case of an SCSS, you define the dollar color, the dollar, and post that you write the name of the variable that you wish to use. And once you define it, you can later import this particular file anywhere and can make use of this variable by providing a where like the way probably you can come here. Similarly, SCSS has these variables and you can make use of these, right? So let me just write down the default variable first. And before I write down the default variable, I want to show you the folder structure of mine. You may come here and notice that in the VS Code, you can notice that I have an angular.json over here. And then if you open the assets, in the assets, I have defined two logos, the one in dark, the one in the light. And then what I'm going to do is like, I'm just going to be defining two brand, right? Let's say default and brand A, or let me just name them default. And then the other thing is, let's say brand debug. So let me say brand default and brand debug. Currently it has nothing in it, right? So please understand that in case if you want to keep variables in, and if you want to make use of variables, and the way that the task that we have in hand is to basically do a white labeling, right? What really happens is that when you define a white label, you must first of all define a different folder in which you would define their logos, and in which you would also see you would also define their colors and variables and other stuff, right? And then their default branding related stuff. Let me define a file, let's say variable, and in case of a variable, you may notice that the theme that I wish to give, or otherwise I can take you back to the Miro. So right, so here the Deepak branding you see here has two colors, the blue, dark blue, and cyan. And then these two colors are used in a combination, and then you may also notice that it has a different logo as well, right? So in order to define this as a different variable, I'm going to be defining them in the variable, and then I'm going to be keeping the underscore variables.scss, the name of the file. So just keep this. And similarly, in case of the default branding, I'm going to be making use of, or I'm rather going to be creating another file with the name variable.scss, and here I'm going to be defining the primary and a secondary color, and the color is something that is used for a yellow website, right, which is a default branding, right? So once these are defined, I'm also going to be putting the logos in here. So let me define logos for Deepak, and here is a logo that I'm going to be putting in, and similarly here, which is the NGRX logo, I'm going to be putting it here. Basically you can define multiple others as well, and now I'm going to be putting the logo and NGRX logo for the default brand. Put it like this, right? So now you can see that I've got two brand folders created here. So each brand folder contains its own variable name. Variable name also essentially contains the name of the colors, right? And then the hash code of the colors rather. So default branding and Deepak branding, right? So let me close them. So why have I created these, and why have I given the underscore variables name over here? So that's something we're going to be covering now. So if you open styles.scss, right, and then let's say if you are trying to open, or if you are trying to get these colors dynamically in your system, in your build system, so you're going to be making three changes. So what are those? Let's just talk about the angular.json first, right? So here, before I speak about angular.json, I'm also going to be covering the work configuration. So I think I've spoken about all of these aspects fairly well, And the point which I'm going to be covering now is the style preprocessor, right? So here, this is a very important aspect, ladies and gentlemen. So please pay attention. And this is what which is going to be basically making this is what going to be you know this is a key point. And if you understand this well, you will be able to define your own build system very well, and you will be able to define your own white label and themes also properly. Right. So when you're defining anything with the underscore variable, and you also define the CSS preprocessor, so in both these cases, you would not really have any trouble. So as we had seen earlier, the underscore variable, both of these under brand debug and under brand default is holding different variables, how different values. However, if you look at the variable name, they're essentially same, right? So let me just compare and open them side by side so that you can compare. So now you can see that dark primary here also has a dark primary, and similarly the secondary and font color are XJS, right? So there as well. So all these three variables I'm going to be making use of, right? So I've kept the name as underscore variables precisely for these SCSS file. And why have I kept it? Because in SCSS or a CSS preprocessor SCSS, whenever you are importing anything from variable, like whenever you are importing anything from underscore file, you can actually keep the underscore file, and then all you need to really define is just to @import. Right. So once you define @import, what really happens is this import would be looking for a particular value, which is the style preprocessor. And once you have the style preprocessor defined, it would actually go to that particular path and would look for if the variables is available. So let's say if we have defined it underscore variables, and you have also included or you have also imported variables at number 2. So when you compile or when you do the serving or building of the application, what it would do is like it would look for the style preprocessor in that particular block of configuration, and it would replace that import the full path with that particular path that you define in the server preprocessor, and then then you do the import, right? So how is it really done? So let's say you have two configurations defined here. So what is the production, the other one is the development. So what I'm going to do is like so please note that I'm doing it under the architect and also under the build, right? So the first is I would define the default config first, and in case of a default config, it's really going to be this. You put a comment here, and in the default configuration, default config, I'm going to be defining a few styles first. So in my particular case, we have defined as the style as this, which is the Angular deep purple, and then I put a comma right here. The next one is the next thing I'm going to be defining, which is the most important one, which is style preprocessor option. So here the style preprocessor option would essentially hold the value which is essentially going to be used under the import for these SCSS files, right? So please note, I'll just give you a recap again. So style preprocessor option is the option wherein you would really have to define the include path. So whenever you're importing anything like this without the underscore, so what it would do is like it will go to all these places and would look for the file name with the underscore variable, and then that's what it would import, right? So if I have included, in case of a default configuration for this, so whenever I'll run it for default configuration, this is the file, this is the path it will take, right? This is for the default configuration. Now let me talk about the debug, the other configuration, which is for the brand debug, right? So how would I do? Let's say everything else remains same, except I have to define it as brand debug, right? So what would happen? Let's say if I run this application with the default with the debug configuration, so in that case the variable import path would change to src set debug brand debug, and under the brand debug I've defined the colors like these, so these colors or these file will be picked up for defining the variables right at the top, right? And how do you define a variable? It's fairly simple. You just have to give :root. Under the :root, you will have to define all these variables inside it, right? So I think we were sorted pretty much here. So what next? So please also note that so far I have only defined the default configuration in the style preprocessor. However, I have not really defined the assets. In order to define the asset, I'll have to put the configuration for assets as well. I'll have to define this, and there's another one which I'm going to be making use of, which is glob. And then so under this assets, I have defined that all the files which are defined under the src assets brand default will be copied to the brand default name. But in case if you look at these logo, the name of the file remains same. So we don't really need to copy this like this. So what we're going to do is like we'll just remove everything else and we want it to be copied under the assets, right? Similarly, for debug configuration, I'll have to just copy paste the same bit, except changing the path, of course. So I'll come here, put a comma. Okay, so you just have to save this here. And now we have essentially defined the configuration for the default config and as well as the config for debug, right? Now next thing what we're going to do is like we're also going to be defining the same two configuration in case of a serve, right? So as we had previously seen, in case of serve, while we did the default configuration from development to production, we were able to see all both of them. So let me define these, right? So we will do like this, debug config and default config. So essentially what will happen, let's say if I am running the application in the debug config mode, so in that case what would really happen is that it would bring up the debug config precisely, which I've defined in the top. And in case of a debug config, these are the files it'll pick up, right? So before I do this, I also have to make some changes. So what are those changes? So if you come right here, you may notice that in case of a login component, I've defined these as js gigs logo doc.png, right? But then if you notice here in the assets, we have defined it as logo.png, right? In case of the debug config, this is the blue color logo that comes up, and in case of the regular config, this is the logo that comes up, right? So let me come here and then define the logo .png, which is going to be under the assets. And let me clear this bit. Okay, so it looks like some error. Let's see what this error is all about. Unfind style sheet to import variables, and then VRAVLES variables. I think the name is correct. It's unable to find the name here, right? So let's just look at the angular.json, see if the configuration that we have defined is right or not. Purple. Let me run this. In order to define these configuration, we must provide the configuration option, just like this. So what really happens in case if somebody runs the start, the default config would be picked up. And let's see if this is come out correctly or not. There you go. So now let me run this application precisely. So yeah, you can see that the yellow color application comes up, and let me see if the blue color application has come up properly or not. So what I'm going to do is like I'll just kill this, press Q, and run the same application and define the start different config. Right, and then instead of default config, I'm going to be running config debug, rather the debug config precisely. So I just come here. Let me see if in case of a serve I've defined it properly or not. Yep, the name is debug config. Restart. There you go. As of now, we have only changed the logo, and you can see that it is indeed working correctly. So if you come here at your login component, and if you come here, you can see that the login component has picked up the right PNG file. Right, so we have so far defined the variables. We have also defined the logo. We have also defined the asset folder properly, and now what I'm going to do is, like, I'm just going to be making use of the variables in my login component, and basis that we would try to generate different details. Since we had defined the variables under root, so we don't really need to import those variables right here. They are available at the runtime itself. So what I am essentially going to be doing is that making use of those variable names around here. So how can you make a use of those variables? It's fairly simple. All you need to do is define hyphen hyphen var, and rather the var, and then hyphen hyphen, and what is the name of those folders? Come here, that's the name. Is the dark primary. So I'm going to be making use of dark primary here. And then the other one is going to be the secondary. So the variable name is going to be secondary. So it's fairly simple. I just need to define var and define it secondary. Now let's just see how it works. And there you go. Now you can see that the application has opened up correctly for debug config. The only thing is that we are also going to be changing this particular name, and we are trying to make it light color, or I think this is also fine. I mean, then just in case if you need to define, then you just need to put in the right variables in place, and then I think they should do, right? So here I think we are pretty much sorted with this, and let's see if that really works with the default configuration as well or not. So what I'm going to do is, like, I'll just kill this and press Q. So next I'm going to start is the default configuration. So now it should come up as yellow. There you go. You can see that the logo has changed and the background color has changed and everything else remains same. So if you have done this, you have pretty much achieved what really we intended to do before the start of this tutorial. So let's just kill this, and what I'm going to do is, like, I'll also try to start this application and try to build this application in two different configurations. So let's see if that works or not. So npm run build. I think one is enough. I'm just going to be providing the configuration as, because the default configuration is anyway it's going to be prod based, and then let's see if this works out. So npm run, there you go. So here the dist folder, let's just see if these correct assets have copied or not. There you go, the correct assets have been copied here, right? It's just that I think that it is copying up both of these files as well, and I don't think so we need these files. So I'll quickly see angular.json and try to correct this bit, debug config, and let's see if the correct variable is picked up or not. So we're going to be seeing this, and there you go. You can see that the correct variable is indeed picked up here in the styles.css file, which gets generated at the end. And I believe I don't really need these two logos, so I can just go there and remove it, because I think I've changed the name as well. So let me remove this. So currently I've defined this under the assets, and that's why this all of these are being copied. But then in case if I were to define that, um if I want this to be defined elsewhere, so what I could do is like I can also create a folder here, and let me just do this. So why styles, and what I'm going to do is like I'll just put those two folders right there. So brand Deepak and brand now assets has the NGRX logo alone. Let me close everything and come here at the angular.json. Let me correct the path. So from STY styles, right, let me do the build again. I hope that works. Now you can see that the asset has copied the right logo and things, and everything else remains same. So here at the end you can see that the RGB color is also being picked up properly, right? So let me quickly recap what we have learned in this tutorial. So the first thing that we learned was what build system is. We have gone through the entire angular.json, and then post that we also saw, you know, how what white label is and how it is important to build the application separately. And we also noticed, and while building the application we also saw that how the default configuration and deeper configuration picked up properly and then renders two different applications on the brownie browser. So I believe we have covered pretty much all what we wanted, and we also saw, you know, the one of the particular aspect which was a very important one was the style preprocessor option, and how SCSS really you know, understands that particular option given in the angular.json while building the entire CSS. And I think it later generated the browser and the other folder properly, right? So with that, I believe we have covered everything related to white labeling, ladies and gentlemen. And then in the next tutorial we're going to be talking about more of, you know, what white label here and how white label is defined inside the application as well. We'll also try to see how theming works. So if you're liking my work, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Also hit the bell icon in case if I post a new video you would be notified. So thank you once again, ladies and gentlemen. It's been absolute pleasure to host this tutorial for you, and stay tuned, and I'm going to be seeing you in the next one.